Welcome to today's episode of our Impact podcast called Life with Impacts. I'm your host, Charlene Saker, and we are going to continue with this powerful parenting series. And today is week 5. I can't believe we have gone through so much content and so many conversations already. Now, I'm joined here by expert guest Nicole Daniel. Nicole is a qualified social worker. She's been in the industry for over 12 years. She's got her master's in clinical work. And she's also the founder of You Matter Therapeutic Support. So she's passionate about working with teachers and parents, kids, and really just equipping and encouraging parents on their journey. And so this series has been such a blessing to me as a parent, and it's really been a conversation. We don't want to just throw theory at you as a parent. We want to have a real conversation. And so Nicole and I are both moms as well, and so we also understand that it is hard sometimes, and we are all doing our best, but we know that we want to do better. We want to steward our kids' lives well. So, Nicole, welcome, and thank you so much for being back with us today.
Thank you so much, Charlene. I am super excited about today, just wrapping things up and bringing things together.
Yeah, no, it's gonna be fun. So, we just a reminder that we have uploaded all of these previous episodes on YouTube, so you can actually watch the video episode on our YouTube channel called Impact Online. And then we also have the audio podcast available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, our app, and our website. So you can go and have a look at that. You can go look on our social media pages for more info. Now, to get into today's topic, we've spoken up till now a lot about building relationships with our children, connecting with them, really connecting emotionally, teaching them how to regulate their emotions and emotional intelligence, all of that. Now, a reoccurring theme in all of these conversations has been this idea that it starts with us as parents, that we need to lead by example, that we can't expect our kids to be regulated if we are not regulated. We can't expect them to behave or control their emotions well if we cannot do that.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into that, and I want you, Nicole, just to explain a bit more as we get into this topic.
Perfect. Yeah, so often we've heard that whole thing of do as I say, don't do as I do. And, often we say it in passing, we say it as a joke, but in reality, that's not how we're living. We are really living as though we are doing one thing and expecting our children to do a whole different thing. The other thing that comes from this is that we're often looking, in terms of parenting, that we're trying to right the wrongs that have been done in the past, or we're trying to create a new space for our children. And sometimes that can end up blurring so many lines, because if we are wanting to help and guide our children, we really need to be practicing these things ourselves.
Yeah.
We can't expect our kids to live a certain way or to have a certain lifestyle, to really just behave and manage things in a certain way if we're not doing it ourselves.
Yeah, no, it's so true, and I think I mentioned this a few weeks ago, but it was also this big sobering realization for me that I can parent and be principled about my parenting till I'm blue in the face, but my kids are going to watch how I behave, how I deal with conflict, how I deal with people in the traffic or whatever. And it's not really supposed to be a heavy, but it is. There is a responsibility on our shoulders to grow and mature as people first.
Without a doubt, and that that often means that we feel like we're living under the microscope. We feel that we need to be so incredibly aware of absolutely everything and making sure we don't fall short.
Yeah.
And the reality is that we are going to mess up. We're going to mess up without a doubt. And I think I've said in one of our previous shows as well, it's not about us falling and what that looks like. It's about how we get up.
Yeah.
And I think if we're able to, just take a whole view on life and really just, model that behavior throughout, and understanding that even if we do feel like we're under the microscope, we need to understand that our kids have grace. Our kids are unbelievably forgiving of our errors, because we often hold ourselves to a certain standard, and sometimes our kids to an even higher standard.
Yeah.
And really what it's about is just understanding that it's okay. We are going to mess up. Let's show our children that when we mess up, this is how we can correct it.
Yeah, no, I think it's so important. I think previous generations actually had this feeling of we must almost model the ideal.
Yes.
What must I look like as a responsible human? But my parents never. They were human.
Yes.
They weren't going to live up to that.
Yeah.
And so I think that is an unhelpful model.
Yeah.
Because we were never supposed to be perfect. We were actually just supposed to teach them about God.
No, exactly.
Point them to God, who is perfect, who is a perfect father. And so, I think it's just such an important thing to grasp as a parent, that we are not modeling, and we're also not trying to model them after ourselves.
Yes.
and who we are. We're, again, leading them and pointing them back to Christ. Nicole, maybe just talk a bit about how we can actually do this. Maybe we can get into some of the more practical, or maybe just sharing some examples.
Yes. So I think, it comes down to how we experience and manage things, and how we respond to certain experiences. And that really is, in a very small nutshell, what it's about. But we can broaden it by saying, if we look at emotions, for example, how are we experiencing, how do we perceive emotions? How do we manage them? How do we respond to them? Are we dismissive towards our own emotions? Because our children will observe us all the time and see, are we congruent? What we say and what we do, is it the same thing?
Yeah.
So if we are telling our children, to speak their heart, to speak their mind, but when we're experiencing something tough, like a tough day, and we're dismissing our own experiences, it's not the story's not going to match up for them, and it's not going to make sense. Whereas if we can really just understand things like self-care, I'm really big on self-care, understanding emotions and navigating relationship building. If we are aware of how we perceive these things and how we manage them and, just navigate life, we'll be able to be a better model and a better role model for our children.
Yeah.
Because it really does, it's tough, but it really does start with us. And I think it's so important to make sure that we are consistent. And if we're going to say, that your emotions or your experiences matter, we have to be very aware that our stuff matters too.
Yes.
And I think and we'll talk about it a little bit later, but it's so important to find that balance. That it's not just about, we're now self-caring and everything is about me and I have to be whole, and so the child needs to be shoved aside.
Yeah.
It's not about that at all. And I want to make sure that message comes across.
Yes.
That it's not about putting ourselves first and ignoring the needs of our kids, ignoring the needs of our loved ones, but it's about just recognizing the space we're in. And I think if we're able to do that and just be aware of our own space, our own experiences. Did we have a difficult day at work? Did we have a difficult morning? I think that awareness is so important. Fortunately, now that we're in the 5th episode, by now that I am as real as it comes. I'm always going to share my own tough experiences because, it doesn't matter how much you're always going to have your tough experiences.
For sure.
And, I reflect on such a tough moment that my daughter and I had last night where, I was just absolutely exhausted. She was exhausted. And we just weren't seeing eye to eye. I wasn't able to regulate myself because I was so tired that I could help understand her emotions. And so really what that comes down to is understanding, hang on, taking not a stopping, because life doesn't stop at pausing, and saying, hang on, what actually happened there? And knowing I can't wake her up at night to say, I'm sorry, but what I can do is when she wakes up in the morning, say, you know what, this is what I was going through. I was really tired, and that meant that I missed what you were going through, and I'm sorry about that. I want to try and understand what you're experiencing, and sometimes I have to take a step back. And this is how we model. When we mess up, we fess up. And this is how we actually just get to a space of, hang on, if they're experiencing a wobble, what's actually going on?
Yeah.
When things start to escalate, is it a question of we always have to check ourselves, and that comes down to that emotional regulation. If we're checking ourselves and saying, what space am I in, and then calming our nervous system down, we can do that for our children. But it's not, we're going to be, just breathing against, very strong winds if I'm trying to manage what my child is going through. But I haven't even paused to go, hang on, what's going on inside of me so that I can regulate and be the best version of myself for my little person. And so that's why I say it's important just understanding what are your needs, understanding, your journey as a parent, understanding your experiences, because every phase has their own challenges, has their own moments of, I want to say, weakness and joy. And we have to be aware of the space we're in.
Yeah, I think it's so important what you're saying, and it also just reminds me that we are modeling to them how they're going to fess up when they're older. We want them to be people who can grow and change and be teachable.
Yeah.
They cannot be that if they haven't seen it modeled to them. The ability to be able to say, hey, like, I'm not perfect and I messed up today.
Yes.
I shouldn't have lost control.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have shouted at you. This is what I should have done rather. Yeah. That is so powerful in teaching them and giving them tools to do the same in the future.
Yeah.
For sure. So maybe you can just share with us, what are some of the things we can look out for in these moments where we feel like we are not leading well?
Yes.
When we feel like we are but out of control,
Yes.
or we feel like we need to get back to that place of taking care of ourselves and being in a healthy space. What are some of the signs that we are not in that space and that we need a bit of growth?
I think one of the biggest things, Charlene, is really just being aware of your own space, your emotions and your bodily experiences. And again, that comes down to that whole aspect of emotional regulation. If we are aware of the space that we're in, we're able to recognize that, we're able to regulate. And I think, for example, if we're engaging with our child and we're not going to get it right all the time, that's where grace is so important. Yeah. That we have this acceptance of ourselves that we, when we fall short, it's okay, as long as we keep trying. And I think the things that we need to be aware of is just, regularly just checking in. So maybe on your way back from work, if you are working, or when you've had a long day at home and you've had so many tasks to achieve, just checking in with yourself before you fetch your kids. Yeah. How was my day? How did things go? What was tough? Actually, the same things we would ask our kids. Really just checking in. Because the minute we can do that, and it's not about... and the more often we can do this, it's easier. And it's not about sitting in this emotional experience and saying, oh, this is so terrible, I just need an hour to veg. It's not about that, because if we can catch these moments earlier and more often, we're not going to need those moments of escaping. It's about just recognizing the space we're in. I feel overwhelmed. It's okay.
Yeah,
that's okay. I'm going to give it a good go. Because the minute we do that, we're validating our own experiences and we're able to be regulated parents. And I know we've spoken about it before. The minute we are regulated as parents, we will support our children to be regulated. And I know we've spoken about this as well in a previous episode, but our job is not to toughen our kids up or to say, because of our own bitterness, our own frustration, say, well, this is life. Life isn't going to be, all sunshine and roses. You better get used to it. It's about just pausing and saying, oh, this is really tough.
Yeah.
Okay, this is tough. How do we figure this out? It's so incredible. There's so many different perspectives on parenting. But I think the moment we can just be real with our kids, that's, I think, the most beautiful thing we can model to them, is if you are real in your realness, in your rawness, that is where we find our authenticity. That's where we find that you are valuable no matter what. Yes. You are loved no matter what. Because when I'm going through a tough experience, I'm going to show you how to deal with it. And so what we want to be aware of is we want to make sure that we're not dismissing our experiences, our emotions. We're not wanting to I've often heard it as well. We're not wanting to be strong for our kids because we're all going through a tough time. I need to be strong for my kids. No, you need to be you. Your kids need to learn how we get up from this.
Yes.
And so...
And sorry, that is strength. I think about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Like, there was such sorrow and vulnerability that he showed there. That didn't make him less of a leader.
Exactly.
He still did what he needed to do, but there was this deep sense of sorrow and empathy and compassion and all of the above. And so I think it's important that we just look back to Jesus and his example of leadership.
True.
That
Absolutely.
it is not, he did not lead by being the strongest and the loudest in the room. He led by example, by true love, compassion, and service.
Yeah, and just being real. No, you're absolutely right. And I think we can look at that as a guiding light because we don't have all the answers. But I think it's so important that we are understanding that when our children come to us with, something tough they've experienced, to be that space for them to come home to. Because they're not, when they have tough days, and this is something I had to learn even more so as a parent, when they have tough days, they don't come to us and say, Mommy, I've had a tough day. And then you can, logically reason it out.
Yes.
You see it through their behavior. And sometimes we are no different. Sometimes before we realize it, we're agitated and frustrated, not realizing, hang on, I'm just feeling tired or I'm just feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And it never excuses the decisions.
Yes.
But this is a way that we can just catch a glimpse of what's going on and then to manage it.
Yes.
So I think if we're able to, just be aware of how do we communicate acceptance? Are we dismissive of their experiences, of our own experiences? One of the biggest things is how are we handling failure?
Yeah.
When things don't go the way that we hope or the way we plan, how do we actually rise above that? Because our kids are constantly watching us.
Yeah.
When we communicate with them that we have certain expectations, for example, with academics, how are we actually responding to their own failures? Are we showing them grace that, when you don't achieve what you really set out to achieve, how can we do things differently? And I think that's so important, is to be that space, to show that for yourself, show that for them. And when we are available, when we make ourselves available and spend time with them, to really be present, to take that moment. Olivia was probably about 3 years old. I'm sure she was about 3 years old, if not a little bit younger. And because of the way that we had communicated in our home, she was able to say whether she was having a sensitive moment or a sensitive day, because that's how we communicate. We communicate with emotions, understanding that this is tough. Okay, now how can we do things differently? Yeah. Instead of, we are so self-critical, where do we draw that line not to pass it on to our kids? And to just, I think one of the biggest things also is just to observe and to be mindful of how we handle our stress and our overwhelm.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, with technology being the way that it is, I'm so often seeing that parents are in a state of survival. They are exhausted. Yeah. They actually don't know which way to turn. And so, at this point in time, the way they see best to cope, and that's okay for now, I always say, you do the best you can with what you have at this point. Let's learn something new and let's see how we can do things differently then. Yeah. And we are, as parents, we find ourselves escaping to technology, that we're doing this doomsday scrolling because it's releasing good levels of dopamine and we're feeling better about things. But what we're doing is teaching our kids disconnect. Yes. And that, what we are doing when we're stressed and overwhelmed is we are escaping. So I'm teaching my child that when you go through a tough time, you're not going to seek out connection. You're going to seek out disconnection.
Yeah, sure. That is very convicting for me too, because I know that is something that I tend to do. And I think it is important to find that balance between, just escaping, like you say, and actually regrouping.
Yes.
I think one thing I do want to say is that, remember, every parent is different. And what you need might be different to another parent. We tend to compare our capacities with other parents, which can be very unhelpful. I know that in order for me to show up for my kids well, I need to create a lot of margin in my life. I cannot be working till 5 and going out with friends at night. I mean, not that parents really are doing that, but maybe on the weekends. but yeah, I can't be cramming up my schedule because I know that I need extra margin, maybe more than another mom needs. And so I do want to encourage you also to not compare yourself to someone else. Really consider and ask the Lord to show you what is it that you need to do what you do well. What is most important to you, and how can you create margin for that? So speaking of balance, because we live in this busy world and it is so easy to just escape the realities and the hardships of parenting, marriage, life in general. So how can we find this balance?
Yeah, I think you've actually hit the nail on the head there. It is really about just understanding the person that you are, understanding your temperament, understanding the space that you're in, because we all face such different circumstances. We've all been raised differently. We all have different things that we have learned. And I think just being aware of that. So thank you for sharing that, because it is important. It's the same with you and I are similar age, our children are the similar age. We have similar interests, but yet our journeys for ourselves is so different.
Yes.
And it is just being aware that there are limitations. You can't have it all. You cannot have it all. It is impossible. And I think the moment we can just slow down and catch our breath and say, it's okay if the dishes weren't done today. For some parents, that will be a problem, and that's okay. But I think it's so important that we make space that, if we don't do this certain thing to this certain standard, it's okay.
Totally.
But let's rather connect with our kids. Let's rather show them that when we're having downtime, let's just schedule in a 15-minute downtime when we come home, and it's also about routine. It's so awesome. I think Olivia knows by now how, because I'm so routine focused, I think she knows when I come home from work, I have a very set way that I want to just try and unwind, regroup. And sometimes that's just about putting on comfy slippers.
Yes.
Then she knows, don't talk to me, don't engage with me for a minute, let me put my slippers on, and then I'm like, yes, I'm focused on you now 100%.
Totally.
And it's even with the mornings, and that's how we gel together. That's how we figure life out. Because as much as I'm hoping that she's going to give me a little bit of grace when things get tough, I better know that when she's going through a tough time, I'm going to have to collect my own thoughts and know, let's give you some grace, because this is how we do relationship.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah, so I think really just to wrap up, again, just being aware of ourselves, being aware to have that downtime. That downtime does not have to be a spa day. It does not have to be going for a whole game of golf or whatever it is that you do. It doesn't have to be hours long. It can literally mean having a cup of tea or cup of coffee when we get home, or putting the kettle on, getting comfy slippers on. Our self-care, our downtime can look different.
Yes.
But the more often we do these small things and show our kids, we don't need to keep pushing. We don't have to keep pushing from one achievement to the next deadline, because that is how life looks now. Life is busy, but it's because we measure success on how busy we are, and we're modeling that for our children. So no, we schedule in, if possible, a weekend once a month or once every 2 months. That is our off weekend. And we need to work towards that and know that when we don't do that, that it's okay, we just try again. So I think just being so aware of the space we're in, making sure that we are navigating things as best as we can so that we can model to our children, not that we're going to do things for them, but equipping them to be able to do things for themselves, because they can.
No, for sure. I think I remember following someone, and now obviously in our economy and everyone's financial things are different.
Yeah.
But I love this, that I think it was twice a year, maybe once every quarter, she has a night away in a hotel, but wherever it is, but she's like, cheers to her husband, you are in charge, I'm going for a night. And I love that idea.
Yeah.
But you've mentioned a few ideas, just sitting and having a cup of coffee. And I think that kids also need to be taught to respect people's boundaries.
Yeah.
because I realized that I've spoken about this before in the series, but I had quite poor boundaries with the kids. I felt bad. They must always have access to me.
Yes.
And it's not that I'm not there for them. I mean, if they're really in trouble, if they really need me, I'm going to be there. But they also need to understand that I'm a human being with needs. Because again, this is teaching them and this is modeling to them how to respect people's boundaries, that the world doesn't always revolve around their immediate needs. It is really just important for them to learn that.
No, absolutely. I think it's just, keep modeling it. Keep having grace for yourself, because we do. Whatever we want our kids to succeed in life, we need to make sure that we're setting that example to start off with.
Yeah, no, so good. Anything else that you want to just say before we end off this chat?
No, I think just moms and dads know that you've got this.
Yes, I love it. That is a good way to end. We've got this. Don't do it your way. Don't do it like anyone else would do it. And don't feel bad. I like what you said. Like the dishes, don't have to be washed.
Yeah.
We have this saying in our house where we say people are more important than things.
Yes.
And so model that to them. And then the other thing I wanted to say also is the scripture that has meant more to me than ever since becoming a parent is the one, Lamentations, and it says his mercies are new every morning. And so that is something I say to my kids almost a few times a week. Guys, today may have been a bit of a chaotic day, but it doesn't mean that tomorrow has to be that.
Yeah.
That's what the Bible says. His mercies are new every morning. Gives us enough just to get through each day. So I want to encourage you, if it feels like your home is chaos and it feels like you are out of control and it's hard to find time for yourself, just know that his mercies are new every morning. Every morning is a new day and a new chance to try again. Thanks, Nicole. Thank you so much for being here. Join us for next week's episode where we are going to be chatting about helping our children flourish.
Thank you so much, Charlene.